So you guys ready to talk cigarette taxes and see if you can help us out? There are two cigarette tax measures on the ballot. The bigger increase is Constitutional Amendment 3 with the money going to fund early childhood programs. There's a separate smaller increase, Prop A, that would go to transportation projects. What you see on the ballot for Amendment 3 is short, right? But the amendment here is pretty long. And that's what we're seeing. A lot of people are seeing a lot of things. Well, you need to look deeper into this. It's more than just a cigarette tax and early childhood. Is it, or is this just legislative amendment writing that we still need to look at the very top of this amendment?
Well, there's two tobacco tax proposals, as
Right.
you mentioned, and Amendment 3 has a lot of provisions in it. Bottom line is they tried to please everybody, so some would say the proponents ended up pleasing nobody, because there are provisions in it that are aimed at curbing or at least preventing any of the new money raised from going to any sort of stem cell research. Not that it would be spent there anyway, but that's really gotten Washington University and some of the research groups whipped up. And there's also provision that would allow this money, which is supposed to be for early childhood education and healthcare, to go to private and parochial schools for their programs. And so you've got some public education groups that initially had been with us that have since pulled their endorsement because of this. And also there's the fact that tobacco companies provide most of the money for this. They also provide most of the money for Prop A too, but it's a different group of tobacco companies. But this one is because it's got this extra 67-cent tax that would be on the low-cost cigarettes, and that's because of a complicated fight almost 20 years ago that requires the big tobacco companies to pay a surcharge in Missouri, and the cheap tax and the cheap cigarette companies don't pay it, and so they're trying to correct it, and so it's all in this one bill.
Right. So first of all, if you're a cigarette smoker, I mean, we could look at how much it's going to cost for a pack of cigarettes. And the budget pricing under this would kind of go down. The cheaper cigarettes would be as expensive as the major brand of cigarettes.
I think that the biggest problem for Amendment 3 is that the amount that it's increasing the tobacco tax by, which is the lowest in the nation, is much higher than prior tobacco tax increase proposals, which have all failed. And there are a lot of tertiary issues around it, dealing with stem cell research and abortion, and the fact that a major tobacco company is primarily funding Amendment 3 and littler tobacco companies are funding Prop A. But I think the fact of the matter is, and the biggest hill for proponents of Amendment 3 to climb over, is that this is a really large tax increase by comparison to the other ones that have failed. And given that there's so much passionate opposition to this, I'm not sure that they're going to be able to divert from the recent history on this.
Right, the focus here should have been, or I think maybe it was intended to be, on early childhood programs. And I'm seeing support from some early childhood advocates saying the trade-off is good for us. Does this legitimately fund early childhood? Because people are always worried about, well, it's like lottery money. It goes in one door, comes out the other.
Well, there are provisions in it that bar the money from being allocated to something else. And so the backers are saying this is going to protect it. But still, the General Assembly has a way of, if there's dedicated money that's put into something, they find a way to take maybe other money that has been spent on it out. Now, as proponents do mention, there isn't very much spent in Missouri on early childhood education now. So they're like, well, there won't be that much for the General Assembly to try to strip from other sources because it's not spent anyway. But again, they tried to please everybody, and so there's it's unclear if they pleased anybody.
It's a complicated
and
amendment,
90% of their money is coming from the parent company of R.J. Reynolds.
Right. Quick question. What happens if the lower tax and the higher tax pass? Do we know?
It's unclear. There are some who argue that the higher tax would go into effect. There are some who argue that both taxes would go into effect. I think a court would end up deciding the answer to that.
I want